Supposedly they're working on the air conditioning thing, but I'm sure it'll be too late for all of us.
Yeah. In that we'll all be dead. We'll all have healed over and died.
There's a tradition at these writers' panels that each panelist introduces him or herself. Mostly this happens because it saves the moderator a lot of work. Unfortunately, this tradition is stupid. You either get the introvert writer who decides that this is his big moment to shine, and he gets very drunk beforehand and goes on and on. You're not an introvert, Tim. Or you get the accomplished writer who doesn't want to brag, so she says, I write books. Which may make fans who've loved her for decades laugh, but it doesn't help spread her work to new fans who don't know anything about her. If there's anything I've learned by attending Comic-Con, it's that there isn't one geekdom. There are many geekdoms. You might go for your whole life sort of aware of Robin Hobb, but never pick up her books because you don't realize that they're just the kind of books that you will absolutely love. So what I hope to accomplish in this panel today is to give you a little flavor of each of these writers, so that you can learn if what they do might be right up your alley. There's another tradition on these book panels, and that is that waving your book around or propping it up in front of you is shameless self-promotion. Shameless! Or brilliantly rebellious Django. This tradition is also stupid. Newsflash. Shameless self-promotion. Promoting awesome books should be done without shame. And these writers write awesome books. So I've taken it upon myself to trash the tradition and introduce each of the panelists and their work myself. I will do my best to be brief because we only have 50 minutes, which gives us each about 5 minutes to talk. And we write epic fantasy, so 50 minutes is barely a prologue. To my fellow panelists who are wondering how long I'll go on, we're going to talk today about traditions in fantasy and where each of us falls in those traditions. Or if we're all outliers, special snowflakes, heretofore unheralded. First, let me introduce everyone, and then I have just one question for each of you. Morgan Rhodes comes to us from the YA side of fantasy. She's the New York Times bestselling author of The Fallen Kingdoms, a YA high fantasy series that's sometimes been called the Game of Thrones for teens. Game of Thrones for teens. That puts some questions in my mind. I mean, if you took a Song of Ice and Fire and took out even half of the R-rated content, I mean, you'd take 1,000 pages and it would go down to 432. Brilliant reporting.
So the incest is only like second base?
But actually, I do want to return to ask you and Joe and Django about the challenges of writing high fantasy for younger readers. Also under the pen name Michelle Rowan, Morgan is an award-winning author of over 24 paranormal novels. Her next book in the Fallen Kingdom series, Gathering Darkness, will be out December 9th. Django Wexler is the author of the Shadow Campaign series, which I hope is fair to call Flintlock Fantasy. That is what's cooler than magic and guns. The Shadow Campaigns began with the Thousand Kingdoms and continues in the Shadow Throne, which has just come out July 1st. Django graduated from Carnegie Mellon University with degrees in creative writing and computer science and worked for the university in artificial intelligence research. He's since migrated to Microsoft in Seattle. When not planning Shadow Campaigns, he wrangles computers, paints tiny soldiers, plays games of all sorts. And he has also written a middle grade novel called The Forbidden Library. Now, publishing is a scarily Darwinian business. And though we all may not want to admit it, we hope that we survive for as long as my next two panelists, who haven't just survived to write many books, but have kicked ass and taken names. Raymond Feist is a New York Times and Times of London bestseller. He is the author of Magician, Silverthorn, and A Darkness at Sethanon, 3 novels comprising the Rift War saga, the first in the arc that has become known as the Rift War cycle. Other works include the Empire trilogy with Jenny Wirtz, Crondor's Sons, comprising Prince of Blood and the King's Buccaneer, and Fairy Tale, a dark fantasy set in contemporary America. Subsequently, he wrote the Circle War Saga and the Rift War Legacy series, which is part of the hugely successful, which is based in part on the hugely successful computer game set in his universe, Betrayal at Crondor and Return to Crondor. After 29 books, 29.
31 actually.
31?
He wrote 2 more than you
I'll keep your website, man. Feist was just published in May the crowning achievement of his renowned best-selling Magician's End, the final chapter and climax of this extraordinary Rift War cycle.
Or so you think.
So,
I'm sorry, I can't do that.
so if you're one of those terrible, terrible people who tells an author, I won't read a series until it's finished, well, start now. Robin Hobb is the second pen name of Margaret Astrid Lindholm Ogden. She primarily writes fantasy, but has also written science fiction. From 1983 to 92, she wrote mostly contemporary fantasy under the pseudonym Megan Lindholm. In 1995, she began to use the pseudonym Robin Hobb for works of epic, traditional European, medieval, and American frontier fantasy. Nearly 20 years ago, Robin Hobb published a little novel many of us have read called Assassin's Apprentice. It is the first of her acclaimed Farseer novels, which introduced us to the characters of Fitzgerald, Farseer, and his uncanny friend, the Fool. Over the years, Robbie's imagination has soared throughout the mythic lands of the Six Duchies in such best-selling series as the Live Ship Traders Trilogy and the Rain Wilds Chronicles. But no matter how far she roamed, her heart always remained with Fitz. And now at last she has come home with an astonishing new novel that opens on a dark and gripping chapter of the Farseer saga, Fool's Assassin, Book 1 of the Fitz and the Fool trilogy. I'm reading it right now and it's fantastic. You guys can get your copy August 12th. The privileges of business. Sam Sykes. is the author of the Aeon's Gate, trilogy, a vast and sprawling story of adventure, demons, madness, and carnage. He lives with one dog and a pug in a small drab apartment and has eaten at least one of every animal on Earth. His newest novel, A City Stained Red, will be out in October. It is often laugh-out-loud funny and surprisingly tender at times. Though since I know Sam, I must assume this was accidental. If you like fast action and awkward relationships, it'll be right up your alley. Sam is a brilliantly absurdist tweeter who is currently attempting to gather the largest collection of pug pictures on Earth. So if you happen to see any pug picture on the internet at all, please send it to at Sam Sykes Squares on Twitter.
No, don't do that. Don't listen to this man.
Joe Abercrombie is my nemesis. He has written some books.
Very smooth.
It was longer than I deserve, I think.
Patrick Rothfuss is a best-selling author of The Name of the Wind and the #1 bestseller of The Wise Man's Fear. He does a huge amount of work with the charity he founded, World Builders, which partners with Heifer International, working with communities to end world hunger and poverty and care for the earth. While I was preparing to moderate for this panel, I saw that Pat had just turned in a novella from Copy Edits. I was trying to read something from everyone, so I dropped him an email asking if I could get an early copy. Unfortunately, it seems he hasn't forgiven me for that incident in Paris with the turkey baster. Because I think I have his reply here. Hi Brent, got your request for the new book. If I was hanging off the edge of a cliff and you would only pull me up if I gave you my novella, I'd choose to fall. If you were on fire, I would tear up my original manuscript to feed the flames. No, 1,000 times no. The only way I would possibly give you the slow regard of silent things early would be if you were drowning and you let me first tie the name of the wind and the wise man's fear to each of your legs. So you're telling me I've got a chance. Well, I think that about wraps things up. Yeah, my wife is giving me the look. Put up the alternate Joe slide.
Go on, Spanner. Whoa. Wow. Shall I do this one, Brent? I think you've talked long enough.
Joe Abercrombie worked in television production before taking a career as a freelance film editor. During a break between jobs, he began writing The Blade itself in 2002. It was published by Glance in 2006, and was followed by 2 other novels in the First Law trilogy, For Their Hang and The Last Argument of Kings. He's written 3 more standalones in the same world, and now has turned his predatory gaze upon the hapless little bunny that is YA literature. His Half a King released first in the UK because Joe doesn't like Americans. And it hit number 3 on some bestseller list or another. It just released in the US on July 15th and has received glowing reviews. And I quote, "Writing in the YA genre, Joe Abercrombie has found his intellectual home. Worth every penny I paid for it. My thanks to the publisher for the free copy." Half a King may be half as long as a real novel, but it isn't half bad. You'll have to read it. And last, with this entry, Joe Abercrombie cements his reputation as the Kanye West of fantasy. And last, I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Brent. I'm a writer. So I've been thinking a lot about our traditions in fantasy as I prepared for this, because nominally this panel is supposed to be about in the George R. R. Martin era of fantasy, what changes here. And as I thought about it, I was like, okay, some of us on this panel have definitely been affected by George R. R. Martin. I mean, Joe, you certainly.
I haven't heard of him, is he?
Certainly. Yeah, exactly. Sam, I think you have. Morgan, it seems like, this pairing. But then others of us haven't really been affected in the same way. I mean, if anything, Mr. Feist and Ms. Hobb, you were writing fantasy before George R. R. Martin. No?
George had...
Did he start, was he writing novels beforehand?
Okay, yeah, George had a couple of books out when I met him, and I just had, I think, 2. I think Fever Dream came out about the same time as Magician, and then my all-time favorite George R. R. Martin book is Armageddon Rag.
Right.
And it's, 60s survivor, rock and roll theme. It's a huge... But actually, when I met George, it was a Tucson World Fantasy, and I had him sign it.
Fantastic.
And it says, rock on, Roy, George R. R. Martin. I didn't want to correct him at that point. And then he went into TV for quite a while, and then he got back into business.
Right. But I've seen that some of us seem to have a fairly strong, he made a strong impression on some of us, and then some of us, like Pat, when I read your book, I don't say, wow, I can see George R. R. Martin here. It just has a completely different flavor. So I've been thinking, does it make sense to speak of a single tradition in fantasy? Robin, when we were in Seattle, you brought up Peter S. Beagle's The Last Unicorn. And I'd heard about this book a million times, so I bought a copy, and it says on the front, Patrick Rothfuss, this is the best book I've ever read. And I had never read it. And so I was wondering, if there is a single tradition in fantasy at all, if we believe there is, and then where we think each of us fit, or where you think you fit in that tradition, and what you are attempting to do in your work.
Was that a question at last?
Yes. That was my question. And Pat, since we're talking about PRSB, why don't you go first?
Me? Yo, you throw me to the wolves. I don't know about where my position is. I think it's probably, you could probably almost think of it as religion, right? You know, maybe once upon a time there was a Christianity, but these days, you know, I mean, take your pick. And, you know, in the realm of fantasy, you probably have sects, that's with a C, and, you know, splinter religions, and even among the religions there's dissenters and people who, well, I like 8 of the 10 commandments or whatever. And, and I don't doubt that some follow particularly, you know, from Harry Potter. You know, some people follow maybe more in the vein of George Martin. Maybe because we read it at a crucial time and we imprinted on it like ducklings. I think I went the other direction in terms of influence, because I read a lot, and then failed to get published for about 14 years while I was working on the book. And so when I was revising, I was probably as much influenced by the stuff that I wanted to avoid being like, as the stuff that I wanted to actually emulate. And you know, like, the language does not get better. The use of language does not get better than Peter S. Beagle's The Last Unicorn. But at the same time, I love the coming of age story, young magician stuff that I got from, you know, Magician Apprentice and Magician Master. The Assassin books, like, gave me some solace because I was writing first person and people said, "Can you do that?" And I never even thought about it, you know, until, and I'm like, oh, I'm 300 pages in now, I can't really. That was just the prologue. But then I read the Assassin books and I'm like, oh good, yeah, you can do this, and it's awesome. You know, I'd like to claim that was a rational choice on my part, but no, I was just kind of doing what felt right. So yeah, for me it's more like kind of the a la carte version of religion. I pick and choose a little bit among many rather than following a particular orthodoxy.
Sam Sykes, you made the mistake of making eye contact with the teacher. What do you see yourself attempting to do, and how would you describe yourself to somebody who never read your books? Would you say, well, I'm a George R. Martin clone, or how?
Trying to pay the mortgage, you know?
Like, I can't grow enough of a beard to be a George R. Martin clone. And there are no Greek fisherman hats in my size. So I've sort of had to pave my own way. I would describe myself as sort of a more realistic look at adventure fantasy of back in the day, because George R. Martin did kind of change everything by introducing consequences. Like, there's not very many happy endings. The happiest ending is when some guy you wanted to die dies, along with all the other guys that you didn't want to die.
So would you call yourself like Dragonlance on drugs?
Dragonlance is a lot like pornography because it was really important when I was 14. But now I'm kind of embarrassed to talk about it. I might say that, but I'm still very much a student of giant monsters, swords that sometimes talk, and, you know, wizards doing crazy crap. I like that. That's what drew me into fantasy in the first place. I enjoy that. I just enjoy the human element that George R. R. Martin introduced to everyone. So God willing, if my beard grows out a little more, maybe I can be the George R. R. Martin of adventure fantasy.
Sure.
And
I think when I read A City Named Red, that was sort of what I saw. It's like, this is like if you took Dragonlance, you know, there are adventurers. Like, adventure is a legit occupation in your world.
yes.
And but it's like grown up, and there are consequences for people for living this crazy lifestyle.
Well, like I grew up playing a lot of video games like Zelda, and to my understanding, Link was kind of a felon who would break into your house, smash all your pots, and steal your money. And I thought, who would like that guy? He's terrible. Like, he kills monsters sometimes, but then he comes in and steals all my money and all my priceless pot collection, and then he goes out and beats up my chickens.
The real question is why they never figured out a better place to store money than in pots or the grass
Listen,
outside.
times were really tough back then. We tried hiding it in the tall grass, and he got in there.
Okay, Django, you write more. So you write Flintlock and like military-focused fantasy.
Mhm.
Can you tell us like who are some of your influences? Like, what is that like?
Well, it's really easy for me to answer the George R. R. Martin question because he was definitely one of my main inspirations. I had been writing when I was in college and I hadn't really written anything for publication. And I first was introduced to Song of Ice and Fire, and I thought, this is great. You know, I had a real interest in history, and for me, what I loved about the George Martin books is the way he kind of took the traditional knights and castles fantasy and brought it back towards its historical roots in 13th century England and Scotland and all that stuff. And I said, great, this is what I want to do, but I don't want to do the same thing he did. So my idea was, all right, I'm going to do a different historical period. And then much later, I was reading a book about Napoleon, and I thought, this is what I need to do, because it seemed like a really great story. So that was actually kind of where the Thousand Names came from. It's like, I'm going to do the George R. R. Martin version of the Napoleonic Wars. It kind of diverged a lot from that initial concept, but that was the spark. So I definitely have George to thank for that. I do more military stuff than he does because I guess I care about it more as a military history nerd / war gamer. There's a lot of things in those books that I'm like, I have to get this right, even if normal humans don't care about that sort of thing. That's good. Yeah, like it's like my arch rival Brian McClellan. I'm like, well, Brian, your book is really good, but you don't know the difference between canister and shell, so I'm going to have to dock points. Your divisions are too large by 20%, or whatever.
Brian cried for weeks about that.
And then these books are actually very much the result of taking something like Harry Potter and being like, what if the good guys, in particular the mentor, the sort of Dumbledore character, were not actually terribly trustworthy? I think of it as the sketchy Dumbledore scenario. Because if you really think about it, like Dumbledore does a lot of really awful things. Like he's sending a bunch of kids into horrible danger without like briefing them or protecting them. And he's like, Harry, why don't you take care of this instead of me easily doing it myself? And so like if we weren't really sure that he kind of knew what was best for everybody, then Dumbledore would be kind of a weirdo. And so in this book, I wanted a character like that who is in fact kind of a weirdo, and the main hero is like, I'm not sure if I like what this guy is telling me about me being the chosen one.
So, Robin, your work was a. I read Assassin's Apprentice when it first came out, I think in 1995, and it had an impact on me. First, and in the way I think that if we were honest, Pat, most of us would say a lot of fiction does influence us. It's like, I read your story and I was like, this is amazing, this is great, I would do it differently. Like this was wonderful, I loved this story. The things I love about this kind of story are these other things, or you didn't, I wanted 50% more murders, you know, or just being honest here, people. So first of all, thank you. And I want to say that's brilliant, and it's lovely going back and seeing Fitz again. Feels like family. But then secondly, how would you describe what you're doing? Because you have an intimacy in your writing. It's really neat. And where do you fit in the? It might be a little grandiose, the George R. R. Martin era.
What I'm trying to do with my fantasy is simply tell a story, and that's 100% of it right there. I don't go into it with a huge ambition that I'm going to teach you something or change your lives or even be especially historically accurate. I just really want to tell a very good story. In the years before I became Robin Hobb, I wrote all over the fantasy genre. I wrote urban fantasy with Wizard of the Pigeons, and I wrote kind of buddy fantasy with the Key and Van Dien novels. So I've had just a riotous good time writing all over the fantasy genre, and I hope to continue to. I continue to write as Megan Lindholm for short stories, and I don't really feel like there's any boundaries about where you have to fall in it. I think if every individual in this room sat down and said, I'm going to write my version of Little Red Riding Hood, we would have that many...
Don't do
that. We would have that many individual tellings of it, simply because every writer up here is the filter for the story that's going through us. None of us could tell the same story the same way. There's a poem that Kipling wrote about how all artists are thieves, and I'm not going to try and quote it because I'll mess it up, but it's definitely true. We're all the products of everything we've read and everything we've experienced, and then we filter it through our writing matrix, and what comes out is our individual way of telling the story.
Ms. Feist. Share all of your wisdom.
That may take the rest of the time and more.
Another 45 minutes. Shameless plug. I'm doing Spotlight on Saturday at 11 o'clock on Route 28. So if you really want to hear anything tedious along with it, that's your opportunity. I was thinking while Robin was talking about, in your question being in the George R. R. Martin era, it's just basically George was the first of us to figure out how to get HBO to spend a shitload of money. and
Well, the books are all right.
And there's nothing to say that the rest of us won't have our things. Who knows? You can't predict. What's more important about I think any of us is good storytelling. And the thing about George, he cheats. I cheat. Most of us cheat. George has armies out in the field in a culture that doesn't have the technology or the infrastructure to support armies that big. But they're out there anyway. Because he calls his bandmen and they all bring their men in. Who's back home farming? When's the famine start? So it's stuff we can easily ignore if the story's compelling. I do all kinds of cheating too, and I don't care as long as it works. And I think
but we cheat so that we can focus on what we find most interesting.
Well,
like Django would want to have the logistic supply train to get there, and so he wouldn't cheat on that, but he'd cheat on something else. So what do you cheat so that you can show more of?
Well, you find something that interests you, and you hope that when you turn the book in, it interests other people too. I wrote a book called Prince of the Blood. I'm sorry, Rise of the Merchant Prince, which was the second book in my Serpent Wolf saga. And the genesis of that book was a discussion with my editor, where at some point I said, what you never see in a fantasy book? And for those who get the reference, there was a short-lived Marvel series about who cleans up the mess after the fights in, New York. There was an organization that they were paid by the government just to clean up the city. And I thought, well, who cleans up the mess? And that actually became the book Crown and Peril. Shards of the Broken Crown. I got to start finding more titles with less words. But I wrote Rise of the Merchant Prince because somebody said, who pays for this stuff? And I was thinking back to a book I read when I was maybe 13, 14 by Thomas Costain called The Money Man, which was about the Chancellor of the Exchequer in France for Louis the Well-Served. and just, all this nice and shiny armor stuff I've been reading, and this was about, okay, who's the guy running around paying these people, and where's he getting money from? And it was a great book. So I wrote this book, and about 6 months after it came out, I got a letter back before the email stuff, actual envelope. And in it, the guy said, hi, I read your book, I work at the Commodities Exchange in Chicago, and at last somebody's written fantasy for commodity brokers. And I think that what it comes down to is we're all sponges. Every one of us has got about 1,000 things we can talk about and pretend we know what we're talking about. And it all has to do with stuff that we went, ooh, wow, that's fascinating. And we want to make a story out of that and convince you that it's fascinating too, whether it's how to fix automobiles or kill that thing under the kid's bed, or whatever thing seizes your imagination. So what I wanted to do is, and I'll go into this in tedious length probably on Saturday, I was an adventure reader when I was a kid. I read Anthony Hobb and Raphael Sabatini and Dumas and all those guys. Sir Walter Scott, Robert Louis Stevenson. But there was no adventure market when I started writing. The closest thing was fantasy. So basically, I write adventure novels set in a virtual but non-existent fantasy world.
Okay.
And as long as I feel that sense of adventure, that's what drives me.
Fantastic. Great. Let's see. Morgan.
You are so going to play.
Sorry?
Would you like to take it?
What was the question?
It has been a while.
Where would you place yourself? Kind of. Who made you want to write your books the way you write them?
Okay.
The following books.
Right. Well, I have to make a confession that, I've been living with my paranormal novels that I've written in the past. I've been living in a world of, vampires and demons for a very long time. And I'm actually a very new fan of fantasy fiction that isn't paranormal or urban fantasy. So my inspirations for Fallen Kingdoms came from everywhere from Disney princesses to Spartacus to, I don't know if you remember the 80s, there was a movie called Willow. And even Krull. Remember Krull? Terrible, but amazing too.
We're here to tell you that your geekdom is wrong.
And even Legend with Tom Cruise, whatever. So, and then I'm like, I had this, I wanted to write about princesses and princes, and then all of a sudden I started watching this show called Game of Thrones, and I'm like, what the hell is this? I like heat, so it's kind of like a blend. I liked the grit. I liked the twists with the unexpected deaths. It was the first time a major character was getting killed off so quickly, and I'm like, I like that.
Spoiler.
So yeah, that all went into the big melting pot and helped develop Fallen Kingdoms. And I get reader mail that, and I can only write it the way I write. So I'm not really trying to emulate anyone in my writing other than myself, writing high fantasy. And I get reader mail that tells me my book, they've never tried fantasy before, and it's like a gateway drug, because it's pretty easy to read, it's kind of soapy. There is, maybe it touches on incest, but it might not be what you think, and it may get
A touch
I don't know, maybe
is that a fragrance?
first base, that's it.
All right, first base. Joe.
Oh, me? Oh, how nice. Thank you so much. I'm kind of amazed. The thing that's really struck me so far about listening to what people have said is no one's mentioned a big influence on me. It was a little-known British author called J.R.R. Tolkien. Tolkien. It's kind of amazing. I think, even a couple of years ago, this kind of panel, everyone had been talking about Tolkien. It's almost, I feel like this is a bit of a sea change, watershed moment, that now we're all talking about the Martin era. Because for me, growing up, it was Tolkien, it was David Eddings, it was Dragonlance, it was the straight-ahead commercial kind of epic fantasy of that time. Michael Moorcock as well, Ursula Le Guin was University, that stuff. But then, latterly, I mean, certainly Martin was a big inspiration and influence when I think I saw a lot of what I felt had been missing from fantasy, the kind of grit and the realism and the darkness, the unpredictability expressed in Game of Thrones. But I started reading a lot more widely outside the genre. I started reading a lot of thriller writers, guys like James Elroy, noir writers like, Dashiell Hammett, people like that, where the prose is very stripped down, very, very modern, very punchy. And I suppose that was really, if there was one thing I was trying to do when I was writing, other than make some money, way down the road, it was to write something that was kind of fantasy, but with the punch of that kind of modern, stark, stripped back way of writing. Yes, Brent.
You amaze me every time.
Just to touch
It's just
on
the accent, though.
to touch on that, I think it is interesting to say, if you would have had this discussion, in like 4-year intervals going back in time, it would have been Harry Potter for a while because that was effectively saturating the popular culture because of the movies. And no matter how you feel about it, you cannot ignore $30 million of advertising money. It just soaks through the culture, and it's impossible to ignore. And then if you would go back, then there's the Lord of the Rings movies happening, and then that kind of saturates the popular culture in a way. And there's two different Lord of the Rings. There's the books, and there's the movies, and they overlap in places, but they're two different experiences. So it's hard in the moment to say this is the shifting of the genre from one thing to the other, or is this just this moment in time? Like, you can usually only define genuine historic trends in retrospect. If you look back and you see what really changed action movies, it was The Matrix. You almost have to divide all action movies into pre-Matrix and after Matrix because it performed at such a level that it changed the whole game. And I think at this point, I hesitate to say it so boldly, but because Game of Thrones has reached such saturation, and because it is contrary to Tolkien, which is sort of the idealized fantasy, this is, I don't know if it's changing the genre, but it's making people aware that there are different games you can absolutely play, legitimately play, and meet with great success.
And there are many parts to the genre. I mean, Harry Potter definitely, in the middle grade YA, it's a different world than it was when I was reading books as a kid. I remember looking at YA and in the library, and there were long series of books by hack ghostwriters, and then Newbery Award-winning books about dead dogs. And I look at it now; it's a different world. I mean, post Harry Potter is totally different.
Harry Potter, when you get into it, isn't truly YA. It's generational. Mothers and daughters and fathers and sons are reading it. I think from the American perspective, I think of Twain. I think of Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer. Kids out adventuring and ending up doing some pretty dangerous stuff. Now, it's a very different world, obviously, but that's the kind of feel that I got from the Potter world. It was kids' adventure stuff told for adults.
If we were to talk about why Game of Thrones might be different than all of that, for me, I think when we talk about Dragonlance influencing us, we all can't ignore the fact that Dragonlance sort of followed a very specific rule set. Like, most of the time, bad guys were punished, good guys won, and usually there was a Kender or something, there was comic relief, there was a pattern, and that was comforting for a while. Game of Thrones' importance is that it sort of changed the rules, and I'm probably not the only one who, at the end of Game of Thrones, screamed at my book, you can't do that! But it did change things more than I think other things we listed here, and maybe that's just what makes it something that defines an era, is that it changes everything.
I have millions of questions for you.
Can I jump in and say that maybe one of the biggest changes that Game of Thrones brought to fantasy was this huge influx of new people into our readership. So we are now hearing and getting input from people who, you know, maybe a few of them were carrying the adult-covered Harry Potter books on the subway, but now we have this this massive, almost invasion of readers who have not read fantasy before, and it's a little bit strange to see the change in the demographic that you can write for, that want you to write for them now.
Yeah, and actually I think this was like the final nail in the coffin of fantasy as not like a seedy little ghetto anymore. Because first it was Lord of the Rings, but you could say, well, yeah, but that's Lord of the Rings, and sure, if you're into elves and dwarves and trolls and whatever, yeah. And then there was Harry Potter, and people would say, well, yeah, I mean, sure, if you like kid-lit, you know, and kind of goofiness and wizards and wands. And then there's Game of Thrones, and they're like, well, you have to stop saying that at some point, because these were three very different pieces, like, in the genre, and now people can't dismiss it anymore, knowing that this keeps
So all of us hope.
There will always be apologists out there, you know?
I think it's more of a visibility thing in the sense that, you know, I tell young authors when they tell me, you know, what timeshare Manhattan they should get, I said, don't keep your day job, keep your day job, don't keep your day job. That what it is that we tend to lose sight of the fact that we work in a very narrow, tiny little segment of mass media. We work in the smallest segment of mass media. More people watch Reruns of Friends than buy Stephen King's next novel. You know, and what Game of Thrones accomplished was, even though it's on a premium channel, and it's the most pirated, you know, I mean, you know, Game of Thrones airs, and 1 hour later, whatever torrent site you go to, you know, you can find it. It's just got amazing penetration. It's an order of magnitude more market than any of us have ever seen. And that awareness is what we're talking about here. Before that, Peter Jackson and the game, and the Harry Potter films, that's one step down. People had to actually get their car, drive to a theater, and pay money. So that kind of filters out some people. In our stuff, they actually have to be readers. You know, pick up a book and read it, and that's fine because, you know, I managed to do very well for almost 30 years getting readers. But what's scary is that it makes us all stop and think. That question you asked earlier, you know, what has George changed? Well, okay, I'm still doing my thing, but I now know I can use more dirty language, and I get a lot less hate mail from my readers for killing off characters, because I'm a piker next to George.
Okay, so I didn't even get to a lot of my questions, but I wanted to leave some time for some audience questions. We've got 7 minutes left. Guys, I'm going to open it up to audience questions. I guess looks like there's a microphone right there. If you see about 6 people lined up, that's probably about as many as we're going to get through. And if there's more than one question to the same person, or if there's more than 2 questions for Pat, I'll ask her a question for somebody else. Yes, go ahead.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that Buck Prisms, the magic system you came up with, was one of the most innovative I've ever seen.
Hi, I'm Chris. This is kind of for everybody. You did talk about YA novels and adult, and it seems to me that recently, at least, the YA novels, I've been going there a lot, and I've been reading authors who say, this new YA author is great, go read it. And it seems that YA is now just called YA because it's about kids, young adults, rather than adults.
In the form of a question?
Do you think this is right? Is it just that young YA novels are now just put in that section because they're about kids or teens or whatever, as opposed to adults? Or are you seeing something else in the genre?
There's definitely some differences. I mean, when I wrote this, I didn't really know how to write for kids, so I'm like, I'm just write the usual way, but I'm going to leave out all the sex, swearing, and gore. And I leave those things out. And then my editor changed a few vocabulary words. But it's simpler. I mean, there's a single point of view. It's a single through line. It's a simpler narrative structure. At least that's how I.
Yeah, I can say that. I think you're right to some extent. Usually YA is, it tackles YA themes, you know, growing up and finding your way in the world and dealing with your parents and, you know, dealing with your first beheading and things like that. I think, and a good example would be To Kill a Mockingbird. I mean, it's not a YA book because the themes are adult, but I could see it in the YA section now. I could see it shelved there. So, yeah, I don't know.
You've got to have a young adult protagonist, but after that, the gloves are kind of off almost altogether these days.
Maybe that's why it's such a wide readership. It spans the...
There's a book in the UK, I forget the name of it now, which is useless. But it's about a kid with Tourette's, and it's full of swearing. And likewise, you get, you know, young adult books that tackle serious issues, drug addiction, sex, pregnancy, all this stuff. And I think if it's handled in the right way, then you can do pretty much anything. And for me, writing YA was really more about writing a young adult protagonist and the structure of the book being a lot tighter and shorter and more focused than it was about changing the content necessarily.
Thank you.
Curious incident of the dog in the nighttime.
No, that's autism. He's autistic. Yeah.
Yes, next question.
Sorry, this is for Patrick Rothfuss.
I'm sorry too.
We're all sorry.
I'm really excited to read your new book that's coming out, The Soul Regard of Silent Things. And I was wondering if you're going to do other novellas, like maybe a story on Elodin's history?
I wish I were the sort of person who planned things. You know, if I write them, I will publish them. How's that for a deal? But at this point, I do know that you kind of want book 3 too. It's mostly an issue of I need to make book 3 really good. That takes time. So I'm going to try to also give you some other things to kind of like tide you over that are easier for me to actually write and get right. Whereas book 3, it's a mess. It's a mess.
Thank you.
Okay, we only have time for one more question. I'm sorry, everybody else is in line. Just one more question.
I have a question for Patrick Rothfuss as well. It's a quick one. I have been waiting forever to read the third book. Is there any chance that we might get a hint as to when that will come out?
That's a horrible question. Somebody else get back up there. You in line. Get back up there. Get back up there. There. I'm trading on that question.
If the news was out, it would be out. It's not like I live off your misery and tears.
Why do people think
It's actually a craft question that Pat kind of got into earlier. When you're setting up for a trilogy or bigger, how do you choose first and third person, and what are the pros and cons of the perspective of your writing? It drives me crazy when I'm setting up to write something, and I don't know. You said you kind of picked first just because you're compelled to, but.
I can say I picked first because I knew this was the story of a man. And that allows you to tell it from a very personal, very emotionally engaging point of view. One thing that I've seen George do to the genre is everyone reads Game of Thrones and then they write a book with 8 point of view characters. Don't. You are not allowed.
6 is on 3.
You get 3. 6. You know what? You're a pro. For your first book, you get 3.
When you're thinking about your story, ask yourself,
Please.
we'll just run over each other. Ask yourself who is in the best position to tell the most points of the story. If you can tell it from one viewpoint and keep it very linear, I think linear and clean is always really good in fantasy. But if you've got something happening here and here and here, you're going to have 3 point of views, and at that place in time you have to say, okay, I'm going to have 3 viewpoint characters.
Yeah, okay, Raymond, last word.
Just one last thing. First person appears to be easier to write. It is a bitch to write well. Probably one of the best first-person writers I've ever read was a comedy writer named Matt Shulman. And his stuff was incisive because, and I'll mention one other reference, which was Great Gatsby. the stuff that gets narrated that Nick wasn't a witness to, how he gets you the story of things that he wasn't seeing, is brilliant. It's not one of my favorite books, story-wise, but the mechanics of it are brilliant.
All right, that's all the time we have, guys. Thank you.